What's up, spooky people? So today I decided to do the Octagon House. And then it turned into multiple Octagon houses because I did not know that there was more than the one. Well, I did know there was more than the one, but more haunted ones than the one. The one that's super haunted, we're going to talk about it, but that man built more than like 3 Octagon houses throughout the states. And then other people also had their own octagon houses as well. And this was apparently a popular structure or a popular way to build your house back then. It had to have been very expensive due to the complicated layouts it was, which is why there's not a lot of them. It's very interesting. The octagon shape, I like to point out just because hauntings, the octagon shape itself has a spiritual meaning, and it is known as a symbol for rebirth and resurrection. So that's kind of interesting due to the fact that there are ghosts and they stayed. So let's hop in. So the Octagon Hall. And this one is highly regarded as one of the most haunted places in the South. Many ghost stories surrounding the Caldwell family, slaves, Confederate, and Union soldiers have been documented. And it is also documented that several soldiers from both sides never physically left the property. So the Octagon Hall was constructed in 1847. It's a 3-story brick home. It's the only one of the 3 brick, 8-sided homes remaining in the United States. And it was built as the residence of Andrew Jackson Caldwell. This house was used as a Masonic meeting place as well as a Civil War field hospital, and it has seen its fair share of action throughout the years during the war, with the family and their slaves suffering atrocities that were against them at the hands of the Union Army. Over the years, it has also served as a school and a stop on the Underground Railroad, and today it is a museum and it's dedicated to preserving the area's history. It was constructed in 1847 to the Andrew Jackson Caldwell family. There have only been 2 owners of this home, Andrew Jackson Caldwell and Dr. Miles Williams. And after the death of Dr. Williams in 1954, it went to his heirs, and then they turned it into a rental property. In 2001, the Octagon Hall Foundation Ltd., which is also a nonprofit formed by Billy and Barry Bird, turned the house into a museum to preserve the historical significance and history. So in 1847, construction began, and this was going to be Andrew Jackson Caldwell's, which I'm going to just call him Caldwell from here on out, for his family. And he didn't want his home structure to be simple. He didn't want the 4 walls. He didn't want, the walled off rooms, and just he didn't want, like, the basic house that you see. And during this time, it would have been around the Victorian era. So as you can see or imagine, or if you know what plantations looked like, those were the popular houses of the time, and he didn't want one of those. He wanted something that would be a little more complicated. And so he decided on the 8-sided house. In 1859, the construction was completed, then became a landmark in It then became a landmark in the South Central Kentucky area. In 1862, Fort Henry and Donelson forts fell, and Confederate forces evacuated Bowling Green, Kentucky, and took refuge at Octagon Hall. 8 to 10,000 Confederate soldiers camped there, and on February 13th, before going into Tennessee, just 2 days later, the Union Army came in pursuit, and they took occupation of the hall. In 1865, following that brief occupation, the Union forces began to harass the Caldwells, and the Caldwells were known Confederate supporters. The Union would sneak onto the grounds, and they would attempt to catch Caldwell in the act of harboring Confederates. In 1918, Dr. Miles Williams from Nashville, Tennessee, bought the house, and he lived there until his death in 1954. Upon Williams's death, His predecessors turned it into a rental property until given to the Octagon Hall Foundation. And it was dedicated to the restoration and preservation of the only eight-sided house in Kentucky. And they want to preserve this history. People have visited this house. One supernatural researcher said, quote, "The house is soaked with blood and it is just continuing to seep into the ground." And I think that's one of the reasons why it's a large haunt here. Another researcher, Beth Allen, who spent years investigating the house and haunted sites around the country, believes the hauntings are a result of the traumatic history that happened within the building. She said, quote, "I've worked many or volunteered at many historical locations that do offer paranormal tours, and I will tell you this place, it doesn't matter. Day or night, it's all the time, it's active. I've been touched, I've been pushed, several disembodied voices right in my ear. I've seen shadow figures, I've seen full body apparitions. Visitors have also reported seeing a woman in a blue dress wandering the hallways and gazing out windows. And another well-documented case is the sound of phantom footsteps echoing through the hallways. Many visitors do experience the sensation of being followed or watched, even when they're alone in the building, and local historians have corroborated some of the supernatural events, citing documented deaths and wartime incidents that align with the reported hauntings. But obviously, you're always going to have skeptics that are going to go in and try to prove themselves right or wrong, depending on their experiences. And like I said, some are like my husband, where he would rather see the axe murderer above his head, ready to kill him, to believe than just walk in a building and hear things or feel things. So some skeptics are a little harder to convince than others. The next house is in DC, and it was once the temporary home of President James Madison and his wife Dolly, because the White House was undergoing reconstruction due to the fire that burned the building during the War of 1812. But so this house isn't exactly an octagon, but the number of angles in the building apparently make it classified as octagonal during that time, which is interesting. It sits on the intersection of 18th Street Northwest and New York Avenue. The unusual design was to ensure the building would present faces square onto both streets and take advantage of the dramatic corner for the entrance to the building. And today it sits in the Foggy Bottom neighborhood, and William Thornton was commissioned to design the home for the original owner. And William Thornton also designed the U.S. Capitol building. So the Octagon House was originally owned by a Colonel John Taylor, and his hometown was Washington, D.C. On the first floor is a grand rotunda where a staircase leads up to the second and third floor. It's considered the best example of federal architecture in the U.S. Quote, "It combines a circle, two rectangles, and a triangle, combined with the elegance and restraint of the interior and exterior decoration. The codestone stoves, other decorative elements and furniture were imported from England. The construction materials such as bricks, timber, iron, and Aquia Creek sandstone were all manufactured locally." End quote. Taylor, a relative of George Washington, and George Washington knew of Taylor's plans to build this home. And he suggested that Thornton would be responsible for the architecture of the Taylor home. A six-sided home made from bricks, which featured the most innovative designs of its time, included a closet in every room, even the kitchen. Mahogany doors complemented the rest of the house, which was built with some of the finest materials available. And today, even today, the house still stands out as luxurious and refined. The home was designed as a winter home of John Taylor III and his family. And at one point, he was considered one of the wealthiest Americans of post-Revolutionary War era. He was not in the greatest physical condition. He had slumped shoulders with a weary expression on his face, and he inherited his wealth, which then he used to expand his father's empire. He planned on building in Philadelphia since it was closer to Baltimore and the other major places that he was personally interested in. But then it started to spread around that he was intending to build this house. And William Augustine Washington III married Taylor's sister Sarah and convinced him to construct the home on the outskirts of what was then Washington, D.C. So his sister got married and they convinced him to build the house where it is now instead of Philadelphia, that was closer to the places of his own personal interest. So after the British burned the White House in 1812, Colonel John Taylor invited President Madison and his wife to stay in the Octagon House temporarily while the White House was being reconstructed. This is also where President Madison signed the peace treaty with Great Britain that ended the War of 1812. In 1855, after Mrs. Taylor died, Taylor's Octagon House became a school for girls, and the neighborhood was really going downhill and suffering. The Octagon House then itself suffered lack of care and maintenance and gradually became run down and a slum property. In 1899, the American Institute of Architects rescued the house, and it became the Institute's headquarters and is now open to the public as a museum and treasured historical landmark. So, going to backtrack just a little bit. So, the Octagon House is in DC. John Taylor III owns it, and his wife, formerly Anne Ogle, now Anne Ogle Taylor, offered the residence as a place for the French consulate. And the house was probably spared destruction during the War of 1812 because the tricolor flag hanging outside. The British already burned the White House down, so it was pretty safe. After the White House was damaged, James and Dolly Madison rented the Octagon House for $500. And Taylor, who was a loyal Federalist, served as a colonel. And the house also hosted the signing of the Treaty of Ghent, ending the war between the U.S. and Britain. Also home to some of Taylor's family servants, upon whose shoulders much of the family wealth was built. Residents included Harry and Whitney Jackson, the head coachman, and lady's maid. They were separated from their daughters, who were made to work at the Taylor's plantation in Mount Airy, Virginia. In 1828, Taylor died while residing in the Octagon House. His wife Anne would live another 27 years and would die in the house in 1855. The Taylor children would then begin to rent out the house to various tenants after their mother's death. At one point, the house did serve as a school, and the U.S. government used it throughout the 1870s before it went back to a private residence. And in the 1890s, the American Institute of Architects would then purchase the house in 1898, and that has been their main office until it was a national landmark in 1960. It has seen many deaths within its walls and has also seen many deaths aside from the Taylor family. John and Ann Taylor, their spirits roam the house, making the house haunted just by their presence. They ring bells to summon servants who no longer attend to them. And one location in particular that has a reputation for frequent unexplained activity is the circular stairwell of the house. Many visitors recall feeling cold spots and strange feelings as they ascend or descend the stairwell. Residents of the museum staff have reported specters and paranormal activity on the second and third floor landings. And it is said that two of their daughters might also linger in the home. One of the daughters, it is said, died after a freak accidental fall down the 3-story staircase. Some of her deathly screams at night, yet were the only ones in the house at the time, and the earliest report of the occurrence goes back to 1908. Another famous presence they claim is overstaying their welcome is Dolly Madison. She passed away in another house in Washington, D.C. in 1849, but her and James Madison lived in the Octagon House for a majority of his predecessor. One night, nearly a dozen men spent the night with the intent to scare off any spirits that may have occupied the house. And then their account detailed the spirits that appeared in the local newspaper, which other publications frequently quoted. which other publications frequently quoted throughout the 20th century when writing about the house. The house was converted into a museum, and the superintendent at the time reportedly witnessed various lights flickering on and off, turning off for no apparent reason, with no one at the switch. He also claimed that some doors would open for no reason, even on nights when no wind was reported. The staircase is the center of a lot of ghostly incidents, specifically on the second floor landing near the banister, on the third floor, and on the ground floor. A long list of witnesses have given account to hearing footsteps of a man and of a woman, hearing a melancholy, sorrowful female voice, seeing unexplainable, unusual occurrences, and even feeling unseen presences ever since the middle 1800s. Lights turn on and off by themselves. As mentioned earlier, superintendent claimed that lights were turning on and off by themselves. On one occasion, the superintendent did go into the basement to again turn off the lights. And while he was down there, he heard clearly footsteps in the part of the Octagon House that he had just walked through. And he quickly ran up the stairs and he found no visible person. So footsteps on the second floor and the third floor are heard walking up and down. And the assistant curator heard these footsteps, and she went to the third floor to investigate. And she said that on the dusty floor, she saw some very light footprints. Quote, outlines of 2 delicate feet of an unseen woman, unquote. The foot impressions were in the dust. These foot impressions in the dust were too light to be made by human feet. The carpet at the bottom of the main staircase apparently flings itself back unassisted. Chandeliers have been known to swing by themselves, and many people have felt a presence standing behind them while they were visiting the third floor. So paranormal findings of this house, mainly made by Hans Holzer and a professional medium that have visited the house several times. And they believe that they have clues as to who these ghosts are. So Taylor's daughter was in love with a man that Taylor did not approve of. And so she killed herself by jumping to her death from the second floor landing to the ground floor, the same spot where the flinging carpet is. And then the light footsteps are also linked to her. Taylor himself, the heavy footsteps are thought to be of Taylor brokenhearted, blaming himself for indirectly causing his daughter's suicide. And then labeled as Spirit of American Spirit Girl, she's on the third floor. She's tied to the British occupation of Washington, D.C. And it is said that she jumped to her death from the third floor rather than being forced to give in to the sexual demands of a British officer who was chasing her. And she can be felt on the third floor. And this is where the servants slept, so it makes sense that her presence would be there in the mansion. Another one in another Octagon house in Wisconsin is in Fond du Lac, and it's located in the historic district of 276 Linden Street, built in 1856 by Isaac Brown. He was the first mayor of Fond du Lac, and this was the site of an established settlement and trading post. At the time that it was built, it stood alone on the edge of a marshland, and it was just wild territory all beyond that. There's 4 rooms on the first floor, 7 rooms on the second, and built around a central staircase. There are 9 secret places in this house. There's a false fireplace in the parlor that conceals a small wooden stairway. And according to the Wisconsin Historical Society property record, it leads to a basement tunnel and then to the river. A small storage room is concealed beneath the porch. A crawl space hides behind panels of fake drawers in an upstairs bedroom that leads into a secret room. And there is a message scratched on the wall dated 1888 that looks like it was giving directions to the next safe house along the path of the Underground Railroad. Some believe Brown built these secret places to help runaway slaves that were escaping to Ontario. But then there's also another rumor that Brown built the house as a fort so he could hide from Native Americans that lived on the other side of the river. And then there's also another theory that during the Prohibition era, it was used for massive trade in illicit booze operations. And because bootlegging was so widespread in Fond du Lac, the city's reputation earned its nickname Little Chicago. And this was a reference to Chicago, where the gangsters like Bugs Moran and Al Capone ran massive operations in the trade of illicit booze. Some academics believe the secret spaces within the house were built during a time for the clandestine storage and transportation of liquor. But there's no real known reason as to why there's all of these hidden places. Isaac's son Edwin married the daughter of the influential Pierre family, and Isaac gave the house to the couple as a wedding gift. Edwin and Ruth raised 3 children, Louis, Edward, and Hattie, in the house. And when the Civil War broke out in 1861, Edwin joined his friend Edward Bragg in the Union. Edwin did not make it back home. He died September 17th, 1862, with thousands more at the Battle of Antietam, the deadliest one-day battle in American military history. And he is buried in the Rienzi Cemetery. Edwin, Ruth, and their children are believed to have never left the house. Residents and visitors have reported being touched by cold, unseen hands and invisible forces pushing them down the stairs. They've heard sounds of the Brown children playing more than 150 years after they occupied the home. Ruth and other full apparitions have been seen from time to time, and eyes stare out from the dark in the cellar where the hidden tunnel enters the house. Longtime owner Marlene Hansen said in 1976, quote, "I regard Octagon House as being possessed by the spirit world," unquote. She is a former trapeze artist, dancer, and costume maker, and she bought the house in 1975. And in 2010, American Pickers filmed at the house. Marlene believes Ruth and the children are restless because Edwin never came home, and they don't understand why he left them and didn't return alive. Hansen also said it isn't a case of believing, it's a case of experiencing. None of us know what's on the other side. There is also the famous Octagon House in Circleville, Ohio. There's not a lot on that house. There are people who have ghost hunted there, and it is owned by someone, and I believe that you can contact this person if you want to go and do an investigation there. But there's not a lot of history on it. There have been reports of seeing a man. There have been reports of hearing voices. There have been claims that they can hear and see spirits. Sometimes they can smell scents. Sometimes the temperature drops. Sometimes there is a force. Most of the time, people go in to this house knowing absolutely nothing because there's not a lot. A ghost hunter that did investigate with her group, Weasel, said that she saw a man, and there's also been a ball that has been thrown down the stairs. She also said that she could smell a fireplace or a fire. And when she asked the owner about a fire, there was no record of a fire. But then she was introduced to a woman who showed her a photo of a man that she recognized as a man that she saw in the house. And she confirmed the fire that happened at the house. So to me, that says there's a lot of history missing and a lot of history that was not documented. This house was also moved from its original location to where it is now. So who knows what they disturbed doing that as well. But that is all I know and can find on the Circleville Octagon House. I've driven by it before. It's interesting. I really would like to go and investigate it. I'm kind of sad that the stairs are not safe. They will not hold anybody up. So there's no getting to the second floor. The floors are probably rotted anyway, but I digress. So the first 2 houses are museums. You can go visit them. Fond du Lac, Wisconsin house. It's privately owned, unfortunately, so you can't go see it. I mean, you can drive by it and you can stand on the sidewalk, but you can't go into the house. The Circleville Octagon House, you can visit. If you go without permission, I advise you use discretion. Not that I'm encouraging you to trespass, but I know people are going to do it anyway. But you can also ask permission from the owner. You can find her on the internet. She's not hard to find. And you can even talk to her. She'll tell you stuff. So that is it. Those are the Octagon houses. My research on one house really just turned into research of like 3 different houses. So just brief histories of each house. They're pretty cool houses. It's not something that you would see today, definitely. And for it being a popular architecture of the time, there's not a lot of them. But that's also probably because they were more complicated to build than regular houses. And because of that, I bet they were extremely expensive. So that's probably why there is not a lot. But the concept is pretty interesting. So that's all I have. I have no announcements, no nothing today. I just have me and my houses. And yeah, life is great. So if you go ghost hunting, don't forget the salt. And as always, stay spooky. Chasing Legends.